All right, I'm back. So, um, it says, and I began to cry aloud with all my power and to appeal to the master of the sheep, which is the Most High, and to represent to him in regard to the sheep that they were devoured, they were destroyed by the wild beasts. He was letting them know, but he remained unmoved. Though he saw it, he seen it, and he laughed that they were devoured and swallowed and robbed and left them to be devoured in the power of all the beasts, the specters and Shaddim, the wicked demons, right? And he called 70 shepherds and cast those sheep. He threw those sheep to them that they might pasture them, rule them, lead them, guide them. And he spake to the shepherds and their companions, let each individual of your pasture the sheep henceforward, and everything that I shall command you to do, command that do you. All right. Whatever I command, that shall you do. Do you. And I will deliver them over unto you, duly numbered, and tell you which of them are to be destroyed, and them destroy ye. And he gave over unto them those sheep, and he called another and spoke unto him. Observe and mark everything that the shepherds will do to those sheep, for they will destroy more of them than I have asked them. And every access and the destruction which will be done through the shepherds, record, namely, how many they destroy according to my command that I told them to do, and how many according to their own caprice. Record against every individual shepherd all the destruction he effects, and read out before me by number how many they destroy, and how many they deliver, save, over for destruction, or they give over to destruction, that I may have this as a testimony, a witness against them, and know every deed of the shepherds, that I may comprehend, understand, and see what they do, whether or not they abide by my command, my law, which I have commanded them. I told them, but they shall not know it, and you shall not declare it to them, nor admonish them, but only record against each individual all the destruction which the shepherds affect, each in his time, and lay it all before him. And I saw till those shepherds pastured in their season, in their time, their year, their decade, and they began to slay and to destroy more than they were told. And they delivered those sheep into the hand of the lions. Who are the lions? And the lions and tigers they ate them and devoured the greater part of those sheep, and the wild boars, the Edomites, ate along with them. And they burnt that tower and demolished that house. Who did it? The Greeks. And I became exceedingly sorrowful over the tower, because that house of the sheep was demolished, destroyed. Right? And afterwards, I was unable to see if those sheep entered the house. You want to be the sheep that entered the house. How are you going to be the sheep that enter the house? You got to follow the commands of the Most High and Christ. So um, let's get into Josephus and Second Maccabees. All right, let's get into it. Let's read. All right. Okay, well, I'm in chapter 5. So I'm in book 12, paragraph 5. I think chapter 1. It says, how upon the fights of the Jews one against another about the high priesthood, Antiochus made an expedition against Jerusalem, and took the city and robbed the temple and distressed the Jews, as also how many of the Jews forsook the laws of their country, and how the Samaritans, right? These are like the Christians today. The Samaritans, they pretend to be the Israelites, brothers, but they don't. They once times get hard, they change. The Samaritans followed the customs. They followed the laws of the Greeks and the sororities and fraternities. Yeah, and named their temple. They named their house at Mount Gerizim the temple of Jupiter. That's Satan, Hellenus, the temple of Jupiter. All right. About this time, upon the death of Onias, the high priest, they gave the high priesthood to Jesus, his brother. All right. But that son which Onias left, Onias the fourth, was yet but an infant. And in its proper place, we will inform the reader of all the circumstance that befell this child. But this Jesus, who was the brother of Onias, was deprived of the high priesthood by the king, who was very angry with him and gave it to the younger brother, whose name also was Onias, for Simon had these 3 sons, to each of whom the priesthood came, as we have already informed the reader. This Jesus changed his name to Jason, a wicked one. But Onias was called Menelaus. Now, as the former high priest, Jesus raised a sedition against Menelaus, who was ordained after him. The multitude were divided between them both. See, the flock was separated, the sheep was scattered. And the sons of Tobias took part of Menelaus, but the greater part of the people assisted Jason, that was named Jesus. And by that means, Menelaus, the son of Tobias, were distressed and retired to Antiochus and informed him that they were desirous to leave the laws, the commandments of their country, see, and the Jewish way of living, or the Israelite way of living according to them, and to follow the king's laws, the laws of Babylon, and the Grecian way. They wanted to be Greeks. The Grecian way of living they wanted to enjoy. Wherefore they desired his permission to build them a gymnasium at Jerusalem, right? The NFL, the NBA, the NHL, right? The MLB. They desired them to build a gymnasium. They wanted to do the Olympic Games at Jerusalem. And when he had given them leave, the allowance, they also hid their circumcision of their genitals, that even when they were naked, they might appear to be Greeks. Accordingly, they left off all the customs that belonged to their own country and imitated the practice of other nations. Now Antiochus, upon the agreeable situation of the affairs of his kingdom, resolved to make an expedition of war against Egypt, both because he had a desire to gain it and because he condemned the son of Ptolemy as now weak and now still of abilities to manage business of such consequence. So he came with great forces to Pelusium and circumvented Ptolemy Philometor by treachery and stole, it says, robbed upon Egypt, seized upon Egypt, attacked Egypt. He then came to the place about Memphis, and when he had taken them, he made haste to Alexandria in hope of taking it by attack and subduing Ptolemy, who ruled there. But he was driven not only from Alexandria, but out of all Egypt by the declaration of the Romans, who charged him to let that country alone. Accordingly, as I have elsewhere formerly declared, I will now give a particular account of the concerns this king, how he subdued Judea and the temple. For in my former work I mentioned those things very briefly, and have therefore now thought it necessary to go over the history again, and that with great accuracy. King Antiochus, returning out of Egypt for fear of the Romans, made a war against the city of Jerusalem. And when he was there in the 143rd year of the kingdom of Seleucid, he took the city without fighting. those of his own party opening the gate to him. You hear that? That's what Enoch saw. And when he had gotten possession of Jerusalem, he slew many of the opposite party. And when he had plundered it, he robbed it of great deal of money, mammon. He returned to Antioch. Now it came to pass after 2 years in the 145th year of the 25th day of the month, which is by us called Casselu, and by the Macedonians Apelles, in the 153rd Olympiad, that the king came up to Jerusalem and pretending peace. He pretended what? Peace. When they say peace, peace, sudden destruction come. He got possession of the city by treachery, lies, at which time he spared not so much as those that admitted him into it, that allowed him into it, on account of the riches that lay in the temple. He wanted the riches that were in the temple. But led by his covetous inclination, for he saw there was in it a great deal of gold and many ornaments that had been dedicated to it for a great value. And in order to rob its wealth, he ventured to break the league, the alliance he made. That's what's going on now. They're going to break alliances in the UN and NATO. So he left the temple bare. He left the temple empty and took away the golden candlestick, the menorah, and the golden altar of incense, and table of showbread, and an altar of burnt offerings, and did not abstain from even the veils, which were made of fine linen and scarlet red. He also emptied it of its secret treasures, and left nothing at all remaining, and by this means cast the Jews into great cries. For he forbade them to offer their daily sacrifices, like Daniel said, which they used to offer to the Most High, according to the law, the commandments. And when he had pillaged the whole city, some of the population he killed, and some he carried slaves, took away as captives, together with their wives and children. He took them as slaves, the Israelites, so that the multitude of those slaves that were taken alive amounted to about 10,000. He also burnt down the finest building, and when he had overthrown the city walls, he built a citadel in the lower part of the city. For the place was high and overlooked the temple, on which account he fortified it with the high walls and towers, and put into it garrisons of Macedonians. However, in the citadel dwelt the impious and wicked part of the Jewish crowd, whom it proved that the citizens suffered many and sore calamities. And when the king had built an idol altar upon God's altar for Jupiter, he slew swine. He slew what? Swine. He slew pigs upon it. That's why we don't eat pigs, Christians. And so offered a sacrifice neither according to the commandment, nor to the Israelite religious worship in that country. He also compelled them to forsake the worship which they paid their own power, Yah, and to adore those whom he took to be gods, and made them build temples. He made the Israelites build temples and raise idol altars in every city and village, and offer swine, pig upon them every day. He also commanded them not to circumcise their sons, and threatened to punish any that should be found to have transgressed his injunction. He also appointed overseers who should compel them to do what he commanded. And indeed, many Israelites there were who complied with the king's commands, either voluntarily or out of fear of penalty that was denounced. But the best men and those of the noblest souls did not care about what he said or his commands, but did pay a greater respect to the customs of their country, the laws of their country, than concern as to the punishment which he threatened to the disobedient, on which record they every day underwent great miseries and bitter tortures. All right. For they were whipped with rods, and their bodies were torn to pieces, and were crucified while they were still alive, and breathed. And they also strangled those women and their sons whom they had circumcised, as the king had appointed, hanging their sons about their necks as they were upon the crosses. And if there were any sacred book of the law found, it was destroyed. And those with whom they were found miserably destroyed also. All right. When the Samaritans saw, all right, when the Samaritans saw the Jews, the Israelites, under these sufferings, see, the Samaritans, they're not always good. These are these Christians. When the Samaritans saw the Jews under these sufferings, these punishments, they no longer confessed that they were of their family. They said they're not our family. All right. Nor that the temple of Mount Gerizim belonged to Almighty Most High. The Most High, the Ancient of Days, the Lord of Spirits, Ahia. This was according to their nature. This is how they are, as we have already shown. And they now said that they were a colony of Medes and Persians, and indeed they were a colony of theirs. So they sent ambassadors to Antiochus and epistles, whose contents are these: to King Antiochus, the god Epiphanes, they called him a god, a memorial from the Sidonians who lived to Shisham, our forefathers, upon certain frequent plagues, and as following a certain ancient superstition, had a custom. They said they had a law of observing the day which by the Israelites is called the Sabbath. Okay, so these Samaritans, they kept the Sabbath. And when they had erected a temple at the mountain called Gerizim, though without a name, they offered upon it the proper sacrifices. Now upon the just treatment of these wicked Israelites, those that managed their affairs, supposing that we were family to them, and practice as they do, make us liable to the same accusations, although we are originally Sidonians, as is evident from the public records. We therefore ask you, our benefactor and savior, to give order to Apollonius, the governor of this part of the country, and to Nicanor, the procurator of their business, to give us no disturbance, nor to lay to our charge what the Jews are accused for, since we are aliens from their nation. We're not of them, and from their customs, their ways, traditions. But let our temple, which at present, which is standing, have no name at all, be named the temple of Jupiter. See, they didn't want their temple to be named the temple of Jupiter, Hellenus. If this were once done, we should be no longer disturbed, but should be more intent on our own occupation with quietness. They said we're going to be quiet, and so bring in a greater revenue to you. We'll bring great money to you. And they do by celebrating a pagan feast and all of that. Today, it says, when the Samaritans had petitioned for this, the king sent them back the following answer in epistle. King Antiochus to Nicanor, the Sidonians who live at Shisham, have sent me the memorial enclosed. When therefore we were advising with our friends about it, the messenger sent by them represented to us that they are now no way concerned with the accusations which belong to the Israelites, but choose to live after the ways of the Greeks. The Samaritans, the good Samaritans, wanted to live after the ways of the Greeks. Sounds like Christians, right? Sounds like those that don't stand on their faith. Accordingly, we declare them free from such accusations and order that, agreeable to their petition, what they're requesting, their temple be named the temple of Jupiter, Hellenus. So they actually, the Samaritans wanted their temple to be named after Jupiter, Hellenus, like the Greeks wanted them to. The Most High's Mount Gerizim belonged to the Most High, and they wanted to change their temple, the temple name, to be of Jupiter. And we all know Jupiter is Satan. He also sent the like epistle to Apollonius, the governor of that part of the country, in the 46th year and the 18th day of the month, Hectomtobium. All right. All right. Chapter 6. How upon Antiochus' prohibition to the Jews to make use of the laws of their country, Matthias, the son of Asmoneus, alone hates the king of the Greeks and overcome the generals of Antiochus' army, and also concerning the death of Mattathias and the succession of Judas. I'm going to skip down. All right. And it's just book 12, paragraph 6. And we're going to read in chapter 2. All right. I'm going to skip down. I'm going to start. It says, but as soon as he had ended his speech, there came one of the Jews into the midst of them and sacrificed unto as Antiochus had commanded, and at which Mattathias had great indignation. He was upset and ran upon him violently with his sons, who had swords with them, and killed both of the men himself that sacrificed, and Apelles, the king's general. He compelled them to sacrifice with a few of his soldiers. He also overthrew the idol altar and cried out, if, said he, anyone be zealous for the laws of his country and for the worship of the Most High, let him follow me. And when he had said this, he made speed into the desert. He ran into the desert with his sons and left with all his substance in the village. Many others did the same also, and ran with their children and wives in the desert and lived in caves. But when the king's generals heard this, they took all their army they then had in the citadel at Jerusalem and chased the Jews into the desert. And when they had overtaken the Israelites, they in the first place endeavored to persuade them to repent and to choose what was most for their advantage, and not put them to the necessity of using them according to the law of war. But when they would not comply with their persuasions, but continued to be a different mind, they fought against them on the Sabbath day. That's the seventh day of the week. All right. The Shabbat, the rest day. And they burnt them as they were in the caves. They burnt the Israelites without resistance and without so much as closing up the entrances of the caves. And they avoided to defend themselves on that day because they were not willing to break in upon the honor they owed the Sabbath, even in such distress. For our law, the commandments require that we rest upon that day, the seventh day. There were about 1,000 with their wives and children who were smothered and died in these caves. But many of those that escaped joined themselves to Mattathias and appointed him to be their ruler. This is what Enoch saw, who taught them to fight even on the Sabbath day. All right, we're going to get it in even on the Sabbath day, Israel. And told them that unless they would do so, they would become their own enemies by observing the law so rigorously, while their adversaries would still assault them on this day. And they would not then defend themselves, and that nothing could then hinder, but they must all die without fighting. This speech persuaded them, and this rule continues among to this day, that if there be a necessity, if there be a need, Israel, in 2023 and further, we may fight on the Sabbath days, right? That's the rest day, but we got to fight. So Mattathias got a great army about him and overthrew their idol altars, the gods of Jupiter, all their gods, and he slew those that broke the laws, even all that he could get under his power, for many of them were dispersed among the nations. They were all in the other nations round about them for fear of him. He also commanded that those boys who were not yet circumcised should be circumcised now. And he drove those away that were appointed to hinder such their circumcision. All right. But when he had ruled 1 year and was fallen into distemper, a disease, he called for his sons and set them around about him and said, "O my sons, I am going the way of all the earth." He's going to die. "I recommend to you my resolution, and I ask you not to be negligent in keeping it, but to be mindful of the desires of him who begat you. And I brought you up, and to preserve, and I want you to preserve the traditions of your country, customs, and to recover your ancient form of government, which is in danger of being overturned, and not to be carried away with those that either by their own inclination of minds or out of need betray it, but to become such sons as are worthy of me, to be above all force and necessity, and so to dispose your souls as to be ready when it shall be needed to die for your laws, as sensible of this by just reasoning, that if God see, the Most High see, that you are so disposed, he will not overlook you, but he will have great value for your virtue, and he will restore you again what you have lost, and will return to you that freedom in which you shall live quietly, peacefully, and enjoy your own traditions, customs, laws. Your bodies are mortal and subject to fate to die, but they receive a sort of immortality by the remembrance of what actions they have done. And I would have you so in love with this immortality that you may pursue after glory, and that when you have undergone the greatest difficulties, you may not scruple for such things to lose your lives. I encourage you especially to agree with one another, and in what excellency any one of you exceeds another, to yield to him so far by your means to reap the advantage of everyone's own virtues. Do you then esteem Simon as your father, because he is a man of extraordinary prudence, and be governed by him in what advices he gives you? Take Maccabeus for the general of your army, because of his courage and strength, power. For he will avenge your nation, the Israelites, and will bring vengeance on your enemies. Admit among you the righteous and religious, and augment their power. When Matthias had then discovered to his sons, and had prayed to the Most High to be their assistant, and to recover to the people their former constitution, he died a little afterward, and he was buried at Modin, all the people making great cries for him. Whereupon his son Judas took upon him the administration of public business in the 146th year. And so, by the ready assistance of his brethren and others, Judas cast their enemies out of the country, and put those of their own country to death who had broken its laws, and purified the land. They cleansed the land of all pollutions that were in it. All right. They purified the land of all that was in it. Okay. So chapter 7 is how Judas overthrew the forces of Apollonius and Seron. It killed the generals of their armies themselves, and how when a little while afterwards Lysias and Gorgias were beaten, they were destroyed, he went up to Jerusalem and purified the temple. So we're going straight to, he went up to Jerusalem and purified the temple. All right. So we're in book 12, paragraph 6. All right. When, therefore, the generals of Antiochus's army had been beaten so often, Judas assembled the people together. He gathered the sheep and told them that after these many victories which the Most High had given them, they ought to go to Jerusalem and purify the temple and offer the appointed sacrifices. But as soon as he with the whole multitude was come to Jerusalem, and found the temple deserted and its gates burnt down, and plants growing in the temple of their own accord, on accord of its desertion, he and those that were with him began to lament. Remember, Enoch said that the sheep was crying. They began to lament. They began to cry, and were quite confounded at the sight of the temple, what they were seeing. They seen the holy temple destroyed. So he chose out some of his soldiers and gave them order to fight against those guards that were in the citadel until he should have purified the temple. He had to kill those guards. When therefore he had carefully purged it and had brought in new vessels, so the vessels are the pots, the pans, the cups of pure gold, the candlestick, the table of showbread, the altar of incense, which were made of gold. He hung up the veils at the gates and added doors to them. He also took down the altar of burnt offering and built a new one of stones that he gathered together, and not of such as were cut with iron tools, just pure stone. So on the 5 and 20th day of the month Casalu, which the Macedonians call Apuleius, they lighted the lamps that were on the candlestick and offered incense. The incense had cannabis in it, cannablossom in it, the incense upon the altar of incense, and laid the loaves, the bread, upon the table of showbread, and offered burnt offerings, dinner, upon the new altar of burnt offering, sacrifice unto Yah. Now it so fell out that these things were done on the very same day on which their divine worship, praise, had fallen off, right? And was reduced to a profane common use. After 3 years' time, just like Daniel said, for so it was that the temple was made desolate by Antiochus, the wicked Greek, and so continued for 3 years. This desolation, all right, happened to the temple in the 145th year, on the 25th day of the month Apuleius, and on the 153rd Olympiad. But it was dedicated anew. All right, we call it the Feast of Dedication, Feast of Festival of Lights. They call it Hanukkah, right? On the same day, the 25th of the month Apuleius, in the 148th year, on the 154th Olympiad. And this desolation, the desolation abomination, came to pass according to the prophecy of Daniel, which was given 480 years before. For he announced that the Macedonians would dissolve that worship for some time. Now, Judas celebrated the festival. Festival is a celebration of the restoration of the sacrifices of the temple for 8 days, and omitted no sort of pleasure thereon, but he feasted them upon very rich and splendid sacrifices, and he respected the Most High, Ahia, and delighted them by hymns. He enjoyed it by singing songs and reading the Psalms. Nay, they were so very happy. They were so very happy at the revival, the restoring of their customs, their traditions, their ways, their laws, when after a long time of intermission, they unexpectedly had regained the freedom of their worship, that they made it a law, they made it a commandment for their children that they should keep a celebration on account of the restoration of the temple, the dedication of the temple. And they worshiped for 8 days. And from that time to this, we celebrate the festival and call it Lights, or the Feast of Dedication. I suppose the reason was because this liberty, this freedom beyond our hopes appeared to us, and that there was a name given to that festival, Feast of Lights, Feast of Dedication. Judas also rebuilt the walls around about the city, and reared towers of great height against the incursions of enemies, and set guards therein, the towers. He also fortified the city Bethsora, that it might serve as a citadel against any distress that might come from our enemies in the future. All right. And so that's that for the scriptures and the Josephus. Now we're gonna go back to we're gonna read out of the KJV. We're gonna read out of the KJV. All right, let me get it. Um, Judas recovereth the city and purify the temple. Now we in Second Maccabees chapter 10, all right, verse 1. Now Maccabeus and his company, the Most High giving them, recovered the temple and the city, but the altars which the heathen had built in the open street, and also the chapels they pulled down. And having cleansed the temple, they made another altar, striking stones. They took fire out of them and offered a sacrifice after 2 years, and set forth incense and lights and showbread. When that was done, they fell flat down and asked the Most High that they might come no more into such troubles. But if they sinned, they broke the law any more against him, that he himself would discipline them with mercy, and that they might not be given unto the blasphemous and barbarous nations. Now, upon the same day that the strangers profaned the temple, on the very same day it was cleansed again. On the very same day it was clean, purified, holy. Again, even the 25th day, the 25th day of the same month, which is Caselu, that is December 25th. You understand? But they got you worshiping Santa Claus and some other bullshit. Verse 6. And they kept the 8 days with gladness, as in the feast of the tabernacles. But this is the feast of dedication, festival of lights, remembering that no long before they had held the feast of tabernacles, when as they wandered in the mountains in dens like beasts, when they were in the caves. Therefore they bear branches and fair bogs and palms also, and sang songs unto him. And they had given unto Most High, and given them good success in cleansing this place. They ordained also by a common statute, law, and decree, that every every year those days should be kept of the whole nation of the Israelites. And this was the end of Antiochus, called Epiphanes, the so-called God. Now will we declare the acts of Antiochus Epiphanes, who was the son of the wicked man, gathering briefly the calamities of the wars. All right. And so that's it. I don't want to go too much into those war that, because it goes back into them fighting again to destroy who was it, Lysias and Gorgias. But Judas Maccabees, he was a monster to them. He destroyed them. He destroyed those wicked demons. Right? Let's see. Let's see. But we will read about real quick. Let's see. Let's read about how he killed Nicanor real quick. Let's get it. 28. Verse 20. Let's go to 15. Let's go to 15 and 23. It says, wherefore now also O Most High of heaven, send a good angel before us for a fear and dread unto them. And though the might of thine arm, let those be stricken with terror that come against the holy people to blaspheme. And he ended this. He ended the prayer. Then Nicanor and they that were with him came forward with trumpets and songs. But Judas and his company, his army, encountered the enemies with invocation and prayer. Praise the Most High. So that fighting with their hands, their powers, their hands, and praying unto the Most High with their hearts, their mind, they killed no less than 30 and 5,000 men. For through the appearance of the Most High, they were greatly happy. All right. They chose to fight the fight with not something physical, but with the spirit, praying to the Most High, singing songs to the Most High before they went into war. All right. So 28, it says, now when the battle was done, returning again with joy, they knew that Nicanor lay dead in his harness. Then they made a great shout and a noise, praising the Almighty in their own language. And Judas, who was ever the chief defender of the citizens, both in body and in mind, who continued his love towards his countrymen, the Israelites, and all his life, commanded to strike off Nicanor's head. And he commanded to strike off Nicanor's head and his hand with his shoulder and bring them to Jerusalem. And so when he was there and had called them of his nation together and set the priests before the altar, he sent for them that were of the tower, and they showed them vile Nicanor's head and the hand of the blasphemer, which the proud brags he had stretched out against the holy temple of the Almighty. And when he had cut off the tongue of the ungodly Nicanor, he commanded that they should give it by pieces unto the fowls, the birds, and hang up the reward of his madness before the temple. So every man prays towards the heaven, Shemaim, the glorious master, the master of the universe, the Most High, saying, blessed be he that hath kept his own place undefiled. He hanged also Nicanor's head upon the tower, an evident and revealing sign unto all of the help of the Lord. And they ordained all with common decree in no case to let that day pass without solemnity, but to celebrate the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the Syrian tongue is called Adar, the day before Martius Day. So went it with Nicanor. And from that time out, the Hebrews had the city in their power, and here will I make an end. All right. And so let's go back up, right? It says, Jeremiah, the prophet of the Most High, whereupon Jeremiah is holding out his right hand, gave to Judas a sword of gold, and in giving it spake this, take this holy sword, a gift from the Most High, with which you shall wound the adversary. All right. And I'm going to read 20. It says, and now, when as all looked what should be the trial, and the enemies were all ready come close, and the enemies was set in battle ready, and the beasts conveniently placed, and the horsemen set in wings, Maccabeus, seeing the coming of the army, and the diverse preparation of armor, and the fierceness of the beasts, stretched out his hands towards heaven, and called upon the Most High Yah, that worketh wonders, the Most High, the Ancient of Days, that does the impossible, knowing that victory cometh not by arms. Israel, victory does not come by arms, but even as it seemeth good to him, he giveth it to such as are worthy. The Most High give it to such that are worthy of protection. Therefore, in his prayer, he said after this way, O Most High, you did have send thine angel in the time of Ezekias, king of Judah, and didst slay the army of Sennacherib 184,500. Wherefore now also, O Most High of heaven, send a good angel, send Michael before us. Send Michael before us. Send Yasha. Send Michael. Send Raphael. Send Uriel. Send Gabriel. Send Raphael, Most High, and destroy all the nations that come against us during the time of Jacob's trouble. I hope you have a wonderful and blessed Sabbath. Shabbat Shalom.